This live presentation was produced in Ashland, Oregon by the Rogue Valley Metaphysical Library and Event Center. RVML relies on the support of our volunteers, members, and donors to organize and present these programs. For more information about this presentation, or to borrow, download, or purchase other recordings from our catalog, please visit our website at rvml.org.
Yesterday, a woman called a mother and wanted to know about tonight's presentation because there is a special focus in it for teenagers. And so I was very enthusiastically telling her all about this information that I get to share with you tonight. And she asked just the right question, which is, that sounds great, and what do you do with all that information then? So Shakhtari and I have been thinking about that, and she is going to tell you what we've put together so that this information can be used in practical and fun ways, and you can have your own experience to integrate all the material that's going to be shared tonight. So Shakhtari,
and I guess I need to get up here, so.
Yeah.
Hi. Well, we are offering, it seems funny to be telling you this right at the beginning because what I'm going to say is going to make a lot more sense at the end of the talk, but we just want to let you know how you can use this information. This Saturday, we will be doing a workshop, and it will be at the Wellsprings, Jackson Wellsprings, and we're actually going to take what we learned today and practice it, and in lots of fun ways. And so I will be handling the first half of that, and we'll be looking at our perceptual filters, how they can limit what we see is available as our options in life, and how they can expand them. And we're going to play lots of games about that and really look at how we can take control over what we perceive. And then Soleil is going to take that, incorporating everything that you're learning tonight, and see how we can actually make those cellular changes within our body and use that as we go out to create what we want in the world. And so we called the workshop Creative Fulfillment. And I'm just going to, we have a little flyer back there that you can pick up later on. And it gives some highlights of what we will be doing, aligning our entire body with our intention, magnifying our personal intention exponentially. And that excites me tremendously, because I know I worked on that one a long time. Deeply explore perceptual filters, and that's what we just talked about. And we're going to hope that you walk away from the day feeling a sense of where you are going very strongly, not only in your head, but in your heart and your full body, why you're going there and the gifts you have to offer both yourself and the world. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So tonight's presentation is in two parts, and I'll give you a little bit of background. Why I originally put this together is that I am now training interns in various places, but I put this particularly together for a group in India. And it's based on my book, which is currently out of print as it's being revised, and it will be available again in May. So if you want to know about that, you can also sign up on the email list in the back. But there's a lot of synthesis between science, transpersonal psychology, which is the polite Western way of saying spiritual psychology, and somatic therapies, which have to do with the body-mind integration. So the science part of this, many of you may already be familiar with. Like, how many people here have read Bruce Lipton's Biology of Transcendence and Candice Pert? Okay, so, well, there's several books back there. Those are all synthesized into this presentation and also in my book. So it looks like there's a fair amount of you who aren't familiar with this material, and that's great, because hopefully it's going to blow your mind and you'll walk away feeling very empowered with this information. How many people here are under 21? Not too many. Okay. How many people, when you were a teenager, had the sense that our media portrayed teenagers as kind of a bag of bursting hormones and felt reduced to a societal perception of teenagers? Did any of you go through that? Any women go through bulimia, anorexia, any of these projections? Nobody? I'm the only one who had a really difficult teenage years here. Did anybody have difficult teenage years? Well, my teenage years were the most difficult years of my life. And when I look back, I wish that I had had the information that I'm going to share tonight. I wish that society had this information. I wish that the teachers and the counselors had this information. But they didn't, and my quest to make sense of society and being a teenager and not feeling the support around me took me on a long quest. Some of that I'm going to share between part 1 and part 2. But that quest took me into a long journey of searching through the spiritual, the psychological, and the physical makeup of what it means to be a human and what is this moment in time about in evolution. I'm going to go into that further after our intermission at 8 o'clock. But I want to get started because there's a lot of information here. So, how the body's development, physical development, supports higher states of consciousness. Before I start, one more check, because this is Ashland, and I know this is a really advanced group of people, and I probably don't need to be cautious about certain things here that I might if I was giving this presentation other places. So how many people here feel that you are more than a body, that you have this non-physical soul? Yeah, we're in Ashland, which is great, which is wonderful. And how many people here know the word, are familiar with the word Satchidananda? Okay, this is from Sanskrit, and it means truth, consciousness, bliss. In the Vedas, this is referred to as the basic template of the universe. So I'm asking you, because I use that word in here, and this was first formulated for this Indian group of interns, actually Indian and mostly European. So in their perceptions, which I share, this Satchidananda as the template of the universe is part of, it is the force. It is the all that is in every atom, every molecule, in our cells, and most easy to recognize when we get in touch, directly in touch with our soul. So the first part is the background, and then the second part will be the application of that in the Ladina method, and it includes the perception of light in the body. So let's get started. And my screen here is blank, so I'm going to have to keep looking there as I go through this. Remember where you came from. Bringing Satchidananda through your soul to earth. The union of your parents called your soul back into matter. Your mother's electromagnetic radiance protected your emerging self. As your growing body recapitulated evolution in your mother's womb. In the first 30 days of pregnancy, you had a tail and gill slits. So that's what we all looked like. The pulsing of your primal heart tubes grew into a 4-chambered organ, always attuning to your mother's heart song. You began to build a brain and nervous system to receive and translate the electromagnetic frequencies of the universe into usable information for your internal development and preparation for outer life. Whatever the expecting mother thinks about, sees, feels, and aspires for is chemically translated to the fetus and determines, or at least partially determines, which genes shall be activated or inactivated. This was the initial findings of Bruce Lipton, which before him, our scientific view of things was that DNA determined who we are. But it turns out that DNA is more like the hardware in a computer, and it doesn't turn itself on or off. And what gets played or doesn't get played is actually not up to the computer. In other words, it's not up to the DNA codes. What actually turns the computer programs on and off while we're in the womb has a lot to do with the mother, her thoughts, her feelings, the environment around, and the infant's perception of what it will need when it's born. So this shows you the connection between the heart and the brain, and you can see that when we're happy, the heart puts out this very harmonious waves that go up to the brain, and then the brain chemically translates that, and that chemical translation does go through the umbilical cord to the womb and to the fetus. And on the other side, of course, you can see what that looks like when, I mean, this picture's a man, but if the woman wasn't happy. Your mother's reactions to her environment prepared you for a world of war or peace. Only later you could choose again. So this is actually, in evolutionary terms, a very good device of nature, which was to prepare each one of us for the kinds of environment that we were going to be born into. And you can imagine in animals how important that would be to be prepared for the different kinds of environmental influences that animal would encounter. The good thing is we've discovered that the programs that we were born with can be changed. And I mean, I think everyone in this room knows this, but it is now supported and proven through science. Nature evolved the cerebellum and brainstem millions of years ago. Repetitive movements become automatic in our reptilian hindbrain. In this picture, this reptilian part of the brain is what you see in pink there, and there you can see the close-up of it. So these are the basic responses that we share with the lizards, the fight, flight, or freeze responses to stress, and many positive developments such as our speech and our walking becoming automatic. It's not something we have to think about. So if I want to tell you a word, I don't have to think about where that word is. So the cerebellum has actually facilitated our capacities in our brain because it's taken over so many of the automatic functions that then we can spend more time consciously thinking with the other parts of our brain. The limbic system of the midbrain gives emotional value to our experience. Neurons from this mammalian brain connect back to the reptilian brain and forward to the cortex and directly to the heart. So in the center of the brain are the hypothalamus, and the hippocampus, the amygdala, and many of the organs that we connect with emotions, also thirst and hunger and the sexual instincts. And this connects to everything from the reptilian brain and everything to our conscious thinking mind and directly to the heart. So it's right in the center. That's what connects everything in the brain. And it is also very important for our internal communications and our external relationships. So how we're talking to ourselves and how we're talking to each other. Our cerebral cortex, which makes all higher thought possible, developed over the midbrain and the hindbrain. So when you see this picture in the corner, it's like the archaeology of the brain. That in our evolution, this hindbrain, which we share with the reptiles, this middle brain, which we share with all mammals on Earth, and then the gray matter, what we think of abstract thinking, developed over it. What's interesting to notice is that in our evolution so far, each one of these grew on top of each other, and they did not radically change the one before it. Some of us think this would be a good evolutionary step if we could start radically changing the archaeology of the brain. By birth, only the lower portions of the nervous system, the spinal cord and brainstem, are very well developed. whereas the higher regions of the limbic system and cerebral cortex are still rather primitive. The baby's first year of life is a fireworks display as brain neurons rapidly grow in response to the environment. Think about babies you know and how every day they seem to be discovering something new. And then when they talk, it's like every day they're adding to their vocabulary. And there's just this explosion of growth going on. Now, what many people haven't known is that that magnitude of growth happens again in teenagers. And it begins about 13 and peaks between 15 and 18. And that peak is not really over until we're 21. We're actually biologically not an adult until 21. It's a different part of the brain that has this explosion of growth, and that's what we're going to look at. The infant's brain has a long journey of growth after birth. The right and left hemispheres of the brain begin to build a neural bridge called the corpus callosum. So I think most of us are aware that that structure is what connects what we think of more of our intuitive right brain with the more logical left brain. Those connections that allow that communication and integration are formed in the corpus callosum. And almost all of that development happens after birth. So that integration of right and left brain hasn't even begun in the womb. Loving care is what most stimulates the neurons to grow and connects the three main brain centers. The fourth brain center, the pre-frontal lobes, begin to develop only after birth and do not mature until early adulthood. So in the teenager, it's this area right behind the brain, right behind the forehead, which is going through this explosion. This means new neurons, brand new neurons, are growing exponentially fast. The heart is composed of 60% neural cells. Exactly the same kind of neural cells as in the brain. So this is another one of the amazing discoveries. This comes from Heartmath Institute down in California. It is the fifth part of the brain. Heartmath no longer talks about brain and heart. They call it the heart brain, or the brain heart. The heart gives out and receives electromagnetic frequencies. It is our most powerful sense organ. It is more powerful than our eyes, our ears, our taste buds, our olfactory smell. The heart connects through the amygdala, that's in the limbic system, to the prefrontal lobes. The prefrontal lobes make advanced thought processes possible. And the summary is, you learn better when you're surrounded with love. And you feel the support of a loving home, educational environment, and community. I wish they knew that when I was a teenager. From birth to adolescence, the neural pathways that are most used become myelinated or encased in a protective sheath. So when a neuron is brand new, just born, developing, it's like a wire, an electric wire without this coating. As it gets used, it develops an outer coating which actually protects it. And what happens in childhood is we have lots of these unprotected nerves in the brain. And again, the ones that get used get protected, and the others actually get pruned, just like if you were going to prune a fruit tree. So there's many adults that I know or who come to me as clients, and they said, oh, when I was a child, I was so psychic, and I saw this, and they had their invisible friends or whoever, and they go, and I kind of lost that. And what happens is, if society does not support these other perceptions, as Shakhtari was mentioning, our perceptual filters, and it filters out these experiences. Basically, the message it's giving is, oh, those things are just noise. Don't pay attention to them. And so some of those nerves that were picking up this other information actually do get trimmed. And the good news is we can get them back. So that process goes on. Just like we get our automatic pathway set up for how we walk, and we can tell our friend in the distance, we know who's who just by the way they're walking. And this process goes on for those first three parts of the brain, the cerebellum, the limbic system, and the cortex. As that solidifies, then the prefrontal lobes go into action. So it's as if you were building a 4-story house, and you had to fix all the plumbing and the electricity for the first 3 floors before you were able to build this 4th floor. Now, if you can imagine it like that, the amount of integration, stimulation, broadening of these first 3 brain centers is going to determine how well that internal plumbing and electricity is going for that 4th floor. And whether the foundation under that 4th floor is shaky or solid. Okay. The prefrontal lobes go through an explosion of neural growth between 13 and 21 years old. This takes you beyond a limited sense of self to a universal sense of connection. So what is this prefrontal lobe all about? What is it doing, which these other 3 centers haven't done? And it provides the capacity. It doesn't always happen. It's a capacity, it's a potential. But it provides the capacity to go beyond this sense that I'm, my mother's daughter and I belong to a certain family in a certain country in a certain tribe. And it allows the possibility to have this wider identification as I am a global citizen and I am a part of this total ecology of the earth. I am part of this bigger whole. Brain researcher Paul MacLean, who's now in his 80s and still doing research, and comes from a very traditional background, has come to the conclusion. He calls the prefrontal cortex the angel lobes. He says they are responsible for feelings of compassion, the desire for transcendence, and the need for non-ordinary experiences. So he, like Bruce Lipton and Candice Pearce, who all started as traditional scientists by simply studying the mechanics of what the body was doing we're led to these conclusions that the body is wired for these higher states of consciousness, these higher states of feeling. The rapid neural growth in the adolescent prefrontal lobes demands novel experiences, group activities, and alternative realities. Because it's growing in that phase, it has a hunger, just like infants have a hunger for affection and touch and those soothing words. Now this brain in its growth has a hunger for these new experiences that are going to expand and exercise these neurons. In traditional cultures, youth was a time for initiations into adulthood, vision quests, and finding spirit guides. So traditional cultures, earth-based cultures, have always recognized that youth was this very special time. And traditionally, that's when they sent them out on their first vision quests. And in the Native Americans, often that's when they got their sacred names. Brain scientist Candice Pert first discovered the brain's endorphin receptor sites in the 1970s. She says the prefrontal lobes are wired for bliss. She was a typical type A personality brain scientist who was actually looking for a cure for AIDS. And in fact, she thinks that she has found one, and it has some testing, but as we know in this country, to have things fully tested and passed is politics and money and a whole variety of things. But while she was looking for an appropriate kind of drug to cure AIDS, she discovered all these endorphin receptors in the prefrontal lobes. Does everyone here know what an endorphin receptor is? That's where we make our, I should say endorphins are our natural opiates, which our body produces, like if we do long distance running or certain kinds of meditations, the body will produce its own endorphins, or these are opiate-like, sometimes called the chocolate-like, our natural chocolate-like molecules. And so when she was doing her research and she found these, she was like, what are these doing here? Because the prefrontal lobes are they're not particularly related to sexuality. So she couldn't figure out what else would this bliss receptor be doing there. And it was then that it was through studying the biology that it took her to consider other explanations, including the spiritual. And those of you who know Candice Pert, she was featured in What the Bleep. She was one of the scientists in that movie. She's now changed her entire thinking and presentation about the body-mind. But it was by discovering these that she had to go, oh, there's a different kind of bliss than what we ordinarily think about. And it is, in fact, the bliss of what's called in the Vedas or the East as Ananda, the bliss that one receives through contacting the transpersonal, the divine, the superconscious, that universal sense of self. The prefrontal lobes of teens demand new and mystic experiences. This must be given positively, or teens may seek drugs that leave lasting negative effects in the part of the brain that is most useful for long-term planning, complex problem solving, and higher human virtues. So in the control, you can see how much that bright yellow is. That indicates how much activity is in that part of the brain and how diminished that is in the cocaine abuser. And not just the prefrontal lobes, but the rest of the brain too, looks pretty dull in the cocaine user. Teens need to connect and explore. Have vision quests and inspiring models. All of us must remember, the entire universe is nothing but waves of energy, which we receive and respond to through our hearts and brains. Probably you've all seen this, which is just the scale of the waves. And at different frequencies, we give them different names. It's all part of the universe of this wave. So the lower frequencies are in the radio wave, and the very high ones in the gamma rays. And there's that tiny little box in the middle there, which is our visible range. So, in fact, we are picking up all these waves of energy all the time, and we're trained, mostly in the West, to focus on this little band there. But all of this information is actually there all the time.
That's called the electromagnetic radiation spectrum.
Thank you. Scientific instruments can detect electromagnetic waves of a person's heart up to 4 meters, 12 feet away. These waves are similar to the Earth's magnetic and radio waves. This image on the lower right is actually from Heartmath Institute. So that's not a conjecture. That is actually what their instruments showed as the electromagnetic field of the heart and the different levels which that heart radiation reaches.
As above, so below.
And within and without. When people are in heart resonance, the electromagnetic energy of the heart is 5,000 times greater than the electromagnetic energy coming from the brain. So when people say, if you want it with all your heart, it's bound to come, you can see the electromagnetic energy of when you're in resonance with something, when you're in coherence with something, when you truly love, that amount of energy is going out. And whether we, with our eyes, recognize this or not, we are all, at least subconsciously, relating to each other and each other's fields and each other's hearts. Heart energy is irresistible for all living beings. If you look closely on the top left, these Guatemalan girls, each one of them has a parrot on top of her head. And to remember that mammals have this same limbic system that we do. So this heart-brain connection is very much there for them. Everyone needs love. When the heart and brain are in coherence, that means operating together, love is to become one with that which one loves. Love is the wave of transcendence. Okay, we're going to take a quick, that's the end of part 1. We're going to take a quick check-in if there's any questions, comments. Yes?
So I remember just somewhere in the start, something about the phrase, we learn best when when in love, or in the field of love.
Yes.
But it was also a part when we were speaking about the growth of the brain neurons.
Yes.
It really isn't just about the growth of the brain and learning it. Anytime we need to learn something, it's best if we're having that love field?
Yes.
Okay, I guess it.
Yes. Because the heart it's a sense organ. That means not only is it putting out those energies, it is receiving and translating energies. You know, just like our ears are translating sound waves and our eyes are translating the light waves, our heart is just like that. It's picking up around, and it's picking up basically the love field. Or other ways to say it would be feeling safe, feeling connected.
So as an organ of perception.
It is an organ of perception.
So it would be safe to say that if a student was really not enjoying the subject matter, it would be really harder to learn.
Yes.
I mean, if they had resistance to it and so forth.
Yes. Chaktar.
You know, one of the things they found is that if you're playing, a lot of the information goes in. It's almost subliminal at that point because you're so open and you're having so much fun and there's no stress. So that is one of the primary spaces in which to.
Yes. Pamela.
A couple of things. The corpus callosum is more strongly developed in women than men, which is the reason that women can more easily function in both halves of the brain at once, whereas men tend to shift back and forth between one and the other.
I wish that I could verify that statement for you. I know all of us women would love to believe that. But actually, it's a subject of debate and current research. And what the research is showing is that it's not a general rule, and it depends very much on the culture and the upbringing. And there's, it's pretty nearly, if you take the whole world and all the males and all the females, at least the ones they've researched so far, there's not a huge difference. I mean, if you take a big enough population, it tends, what Pamela's talking about is the thickness of that corpus callosum, which is the connecting point of the right and left hemispheres.
Well, I've come across that information in several places, including
Yes.
a tape on the brain I'm listening to at this time. So
This is the latest I have within the last few months, because
it'd be interesting. Let me know.
there's many theories that they take it and they work with it and they come up with results, and then they do more research and it modifies it. But that was what they were saying a few years ago. And it may be that it was true, you know, in America. It may be that it was true in the population that they were studying, which I believe was here. But if you take, for example, men in India who are meditating and who are incredibly intuitive and psychic and whatever, and then it globally it tends to balance out a bit.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I'd like to hear whatever you find in the future about it. The other thing I just was hearing about today is that there's a program that's developed for toddlers. I'm talking about the explosive neurons in the brain. And we all think of children not generally learning to speak until they're around 2. 2 to 3 is when they get their vocabulary. Well, this program teaches sign language to toddlers of 1 and 2 and 3. Sign language that means sentences like, I'm hungry, I'm thirsty, I don't want that, I'm sorry, please, thank you. And they're finding that most infants can learn these sign languages even at 1 year old or less. And then by the time they do start speaking, their speaking vocabulary comes in much more quickly and more fully.
Yeah.
And what it's doing is it's allowing the infants to use the capacities that they have to communicate, but they don't have the physical development for speaking the words, but they can do the signs, and so there's less frustration because they're able to say what they want to their parents.
Yes. Thank you.
And one last thing, because
Yes.
you had pictures on there of teenagers, 2 of the 4 pictures were teenagers with cell phones, and the brain of a person under 21, actually it's up to 25, has more fluid in the brain, and so the cell phone has more impact negatively on that developing brain.
This is also true. And that's why those of us who do have teenagers, who do have cell phones, it's important to either get the ear, what do you call that? Yeah, the headsets, and to also look for the lowest radiation possible, and some of these devices that help to balance out, that you can put on the cell phones and computers and other things that help to balance out the
Is
Holding
air
something
tube.
out.
Yeah, those electromagnetic waves, because as I think most of you know,
One of the things about electromagnetic radiation is that the intensity of it falls off at the square of the distance, which means that you only need to get the cell phone a small distance away from your body to reduce the amount of power of the radiation. So headsets, wired headsets or wireless, but preferably wired headsets, and put the cell phone on the table and be 2, 3, 4 feet away from the radiating device is a way of minimizing its detrimental influence.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes.
I had a question.
Yeah.
Has there been a research on, you talked about the quality of energy from the heart going to the brain. Has there been any research on that energy frequency going to the brain and the quality of thoughts?
Yes. Yes, thank you. That's a great question. Yes, and it is a two-way street. What is really interesting about it is, and we're going to leap ahead just a tiny bit, and then because it's actually in part 2, and I'm going to give you a break here. It is a two-way street, and what is interesting, though, is that the heart and brain do rely on each other. The heart relies on the brain for information about what is actually happening. The thing is that the way we create images in our mind it's actually a very similar process to how we create external images. Even what we are visually seeing, how we actually see that whole process is quite similar. The heart cannot interpret what the images that come, the information that comes through those images to the heart cannot distinguish whether this is truth, fantasy, past, present, or future. And so the heart is very much relying on the brain for its response to what we're walking around with as our paradigm, you know, as our world concept of what's going on out there. And the heart takes everything that comes from the mind as this is so. So yes, this is where the visualization, this is where what we think is so important, what kinds of moods we get into are very important, and this is not to diminish the usefulness of negative emotions at all. I don't want to say that because that also isn't true. But there is this place of how our heart functions does interrelate with our brain, and so we can help the heart out a great deal, and vice versa, the heart helps the brain out a great deal. So the first part of this presentation is really about what science is finding about our physical body. And probably most people in this room who have spent time with meditation are very aware that we're not just a physical body, and some systems say that we actually have 12 subtle bodies. And whatever the number is, I would imagine, is everybody here familiar with the word chakras? Everyone knows that we have energy centers in our body.
That wall over there.
There's a graphic of them there. So my work is really based on integrating this scientific knowledge with the spiritual quest. So when I was 16 and I could not make sense of the world, I had actually grown up overseas and had the great joy of traveling with my family through much of the world in probably the safest time in human history, which was the 50s and 60s. And I actually experienced a world of peace. And this was in going through Machu Picchu in Peru and the pyramids in Egypt and even Angkor Wat in Cambodia. And the world that I saw was friendly and diverse and culturally rich. But my parents were very focused that we see all the great civilizations. And at a certain point, it occurred to me that these were all in the past. And then for the first time in my life, I was placed in a boarding school in Colorado, so it was my first time living in the States. And there was Vietnam. And then there was all the exposés about DDT. And then there was a government that didn't seem to be responding to people's concerns. Sound familiar? So I had grown up with these very humanitarian parents, but their step forward in their life had been to extricate themselves from Christianity. So they were atheists. So we were brought up with that scientific approach to things. So there I was at a teenager in America, and they were doing nuclear testing underground, 100 miles from my school. And they told us all to get to the school while the testing was going on. And it all started falling apart, and it didn't make sense anymore. And there weren't really answers. I actually did take a comparative religions class, and none of it quite made sense to me. And I took a yoga class, and I started having experiences, but I didn't have any context for them. I didn't know what they were. Nobody told me they were spiritual experiences. There were no words for it. I didn't, at 15 I had my first past life experience, but I didn't know what it was. It was just, I walked into a plaza and I saw it all as it was several centuries ago. And it was like, that's bizarre. And it took me years to go, oh, that's what that was. Nobody was talking about those things, even my yoga teacher. However, this not making sense started to gnaw on me, and I couldn't rest with that. It evoked my sense of finding out what is this all about. And since I had seen all these different cultures, I knew that each one had its own, what we would now call, paradigm. And they all seem so relative. And so my quest was, is there anything essentially true? Is there anything besides this human relativity to life? So I asked my yoga teacher if she could give me the address of some ashrams in India. And I wasn't at all convinced that I was going to find anything. And I was very aware that I had this strong scientific mind, and I was going to have to see or experience some kind of miracle to get that anything else existed. So she gave me the list, and my eye just went to Sri Aurobindo Ashram, and I said, how about this? That's a funny name. Doesn't sound really very Indian. She said, well, you won't like it. They do gymnastics, they don't do asanas, and they have a school. And this light went off. I went, school, great, you know, I'm 16. So that's how I convinced my parents, who were actually still living in Saudi Arabia. I said, I'll finish school in India, then I'll go to the university. So they actually let me go. And I arrived not knowing anything except for that I was going to ask them if I could go to school there. And my concept was that I was going to either find this thing called truth, or I was going to get off the planet. Because the pain of this society and world that was not responding to what people wanted, to what people were calling for, was too much. And the fortunate thing was that the secretary of the ashram immediately took pity on me, and he said, would you like to have darshan with the mother? And I had heard that the original yogi Sri Aurobindo had died, and this French woman who had been his partner, his spiritual partner, had taken over the ashram. And I said, yes, sure. And not really knowing what darshan was, it's equivalent of what people would call diksha here now, which is basically a spiritual master, in her case, was a spiritual master who looks deeply into your eyes, and there's a transmission of spiritual energy. So 3 days later, I was sitting outside the door in this queue, and what the secretary had told me was, quiet your mind and be open. And I didn't even know what that meant. So I'm squirming around, going, quiet my mind. So this queue goes in, and I looked over, because this queue would go one by one in front of her, and have her darshan, and she would give them a blessing packet, and they would leave. So I was on this side, and the mother was over there, And I looked over and I went into shock. My brain screamed, "She's not human!" And it was, that was the best my Western mind can come up with. She didn't strike me in that moment as a holy person or a saint or a goddess or anything. She was just wholly different. And I could not equate who she was with anything in my known universe. And now, using these terms, I would say her body did not resonate as our bodies resonate. Her body did not resonate as the Dalai Lama's body resonates. Her body had a different resonance to it. So I actually had achieved what the secretary had asked, because when I sat in front of her, my mind was a complete blank. Shocked into silence. And when she looked into my eyes, there was such an intensity that I could feel her sight. And I could feel her going down through my body. And I could see what she was seeing. And it was dark and muddy, and I was like, part of me was like, not real happy that she's seeing all, it didn't look too good in there. So, but her sight kept going, and all of a sudden, she reached my heart, and I saw a light. And everything changed. Everything changed. So, and then she smiled, and I walked out of the room in a completely altered time-space continuum. And I sat in the courtyard, and I actually could see thoughts forming above my head. And it was like they were dripping down. And when they landed, I knew what they were. So I was in that state for some hours, and I knew. And I knew that she knew. And I knew that's why I was born. And I knew that's what was in me, and I knew it was everywhere. So, what I have to say is, all of us who have had peak experiences in our lives, there's a tendency for something to be very strong in the moment, and then we have to do the work to actually maintain that. That we get these breakthroughs, and then there's a process of integration. And then there's the process of the parts of us that didn't recognize that moment, and they come up. So my mind never doubted that experience ever, but there were certainly times after where I could not access it. And to make a long story short, I still found that although this did answer my first initial question, which is there something essential? Is there an essential truth? That is still something that has to be experienced. We can talk about it, but there's an experience of it. So, knowing it was there was extremely helpful, but it didn't answer then all the other questions that came up. And all those other questions took me through actually then going to university and studying biology and psychology and then getting my master's. And that helped bring in that picture of how we have something essential, but actually we are full of subpersonalities, different tendencies, and some of these parts of ourselves don't know each other, never met each other, don't know they exist in the same body, the same being. And psychology in general is meant to be a process of integration and discovery. So even though I went through transpersonal psychology, which takes the spiritual as the core, it didn't actually satisfy my own quest of how do we integrate this experience from the center of the heart with this personality self. And I became a massage therapist and studied somatic therapies, learned about the wisdom of the cells. And then it was a question of, and then how do we integrate all of that? So in time, those answers came, and some of those answers came through my own process, and some of those answers came through working with clients. So I'm going to show you through images what one of those processes are that I came to, which was my way of integrating and synthesizing my own experience and all these different realms. And I'll just tell you, because I had my own meditation techniques and how I would get to that place inside of myself. But how this happened and how I discovered this can work with others is that at that time, after graduate school, I was doing somatic therapy and transpersonal therapy together. But my impulse was to follow the body wisdom. And my belief is that the body knows exactly how to heal and how to integrate. And that it's really up to therapists to listen to that and follow that track and support and help that natural process, which is already there. And it's as if you have a ball of yarn and you just take the thread and you start following it until it all unwinds or it all comes into its new harmony. And this worked amazingly well for physical as well as emotional issues that arose. But it was very much in the tradition of following a client's process. So, for example, someone would come to me and I would have them scan their body and they would tell me what was calling. And that's where we would start. And we would start working there and find out what the body had to say about it. And even asking the body how it was willing to heal. And when you learn processes for body-mind dialogue, you find out that the body is very willing to tell you and will tell you exactly how it's willing to heal. But it was still internally not quite satisfying my own life and the directions that I had gone through and what I saw as this need of the spiritual physical integration. So one day I had been working with a pregnant woman, and she was very smart in that she understood that her childhood issues, including abuse with her father, might have some residue. And she very much wanted to be the best possible mother, and she wanted to be clear, and she didn't want to carry her baggage onto her child. And so one day when we were working, I asked her, what she was feeling, and she said her heart. So we went to the heart, and what she saw, and what I also saw, because through all this my hands have learned to see, she saw like a Japanese weapon, what they call a chakra weapon, which is actually this disc that's very sharp, and you throw it to cut somebody's head off. And she saw that just above her heart. I was going, and she knew that this is what she was doing to push her husband away, and she knew that this is how she protected herself from people getting too close. So at that moment, I was going like, okay, wow. It was really intense, and my usual way of working, I knew it wasn't going to do it. So I was in one of those moments where I actually internally called to the mother, and I said, okay, what do we do with this? And her response to me was, have her look behind it. So I said, okay, well, just notice that that's there, and but can you look behind that? Can you feel behind that? And so she started going deeper into her heart. And she went right into the center of her heart, and she went, oh, it's all pink. And she felt all of her love, and she felt her true self there. And she was very happy. And she kept going. And she went right through the center of her heart to this region behind the heart in front of the spine. And she said, it's all light. And I knew that she had been meditating for 20 years, so I thought, well, maybe she sees this every day. And so I said, is that something new for you? And she said, yeah, and it's a little scary. And I said, well, why is that? She said, well, it's so vast. It's so infinite. She said, I feel that if I go into that and I explore it, I might not come back. So being the good therapist I was, I said, well, why don't you just stop and be where you feel safe? And just notice that it's there. And since you got there through your body and through your body consciousness, it must be part of you. So she stayed there at the edge of the infinite and noticed this vast white light. And then we just invited that experience, whatever she wanted of that experience, to come back forward to the center of her heart and then back to the surface. So when she came back, I said, so how does it look now? What happened to that chakra weapon? She said, oh, it's gone. It's full of orange and blue and yellow light. And she was feeling really creative and really great and wonderful. And in subsequent sessions, she said her whole entire relationship with her husband had changed. She was really happy. She was able to integrate her true internal love. She had her baby in 3 hours, perfect birthing, and proceeded to be a great mother of a very strong little girl. So that was the beginning, and that was 1998. For quite a while, I used this process just with people who meditated, and then I started exploring with people who don't. And what I found is that virtually everyone that I've worked with can distinguish 3 very distinct levels of their heart. So the surface level relates to the our emotional feelings, our emotional attachments. And heartaches, unresolved issues. When those can be cleared or moved beyond, in the center of the heart, people have images and experiences of their individualized divine center, which we call the embodied soul. But it's still, it's your soul. It's your individual soul. It's not my soul. When people go beyond that, and I'm talking, we are going through the body consciousness. This is how I work it with people. Virtually everyone comes to experiences or images of something vast. Sometimes it's the ocean, sometimes it's outer space, sometimes it's the sun. And at that point, no one has yet been able to say I, or me, or mine. It is the body's reception, you could say, of the infinite. And the body records this. The body knows this. And the body can tell us about it. And it is our physical bodies, that connection to the transpersonal, to the all. So my process is not just that people go there and people can and they can have their Nirvana experiences, but that's really what meditation is for. The processes that I work with people or so that this can become integrated in everyday life. And so then we invite that, what they see, what they feel from that space back through each of these layers. And they change and they adapt. But what this does is it gives someone a body-anchored experience of being a continuum. That actually each one of us is a continuum. We are an individual. We are this personality. We are a soul. And we are all connected. So it gives the body this sense. And when the body has once had this sense, that activates the body's memory. Turns out every single cell in our body has a memory receptor. So that anchors it, and that makes it much easier outside of meditations when we're walking around to feel this sense that I am a continuum. I'm not this or this or this. I am the whole thing. I am this continuum. So now we're going to show you in images what that's all about. And then we'll have a short moment for questions afterwards. So, each one of us is a dot connected to the divine canvas. Together we make up the divine creative expression of the world. Astrophysicists tell us that actually the entire universe is made of nothing but white light. Our capacity to translate electromagnetic waves of white light into color is a complex function of the brain. Polarized light allows us to see the crystalline structure of minerals and the crystalline colors of light which exist in all living organisms. This is Mei Wan Ho, who I consider to be the Einstein of biology these days. And the 4-minute DVD that I showed you in the beginning, that was living organisms in motion where you could see the internal crystalline light structure. She, by the way, is the only one who, well, she is the one who discovered how to photograph that. It's not an aura, it's actually the light of the cells. Most people know of the third chakra, third eye. This gives us the vision of the subtle bodies and planes of consciousness. There are other ways of seeing. The pineal gland is biologically the vestige of an ancient third eye. There are fossil records of lizards who actually have a physical third eye. The pineal gland produces serotonin, which it converts into melatonin. Melatonin circulates throughout the body. High concentrations are found in the brain, heart, skin, and genitals. This gives all cells the capacity to sense light. Many healers can see through their hands. Through our normal eyes, the world looks opaque. The analogy here is the sun there would be like your physical eye, and that's how it looks to us. With practice, everyone can learn to see into the geography of the cellular consciousness. Layers of the heart, which is the process I described to you, is like going through a 3-story house. You start at the top sternum level. In the center, you see the images of your psychic being. A psychic being is Sri Aurobindo's terminology for the embodied soul. Behind the heart is often flooded with light. I particularly picked this picture because many people in the center of their heart feel that sweetness of the sense of being a child of the divine. Being connected to the divine, but also being a child of the divine. And it's where gratitude naturally springs from. You don't have to seek it, it's its natural condition, it's its natural state of being. You experience yourself as a continuum from the emotional heart center to the psychic being to the transpersonal self. Many people see liquid light in their heart center. And what I mean by liquid light is that it has a sense of texture. It's something that they can feel, has a texture, and they can feel how it moves. So it's not just a visual experience. Many people also see the opalescent Ladina energies. I haven't explained that, but read my book. Layers of the heart gives you the direct experience of your central self, your inner self. Then it is time to discover and integrate all the other many parts of your being with this central self. That's for my interns. I'm not going to go into it here, but it is basically confirming that what is above is below, and below means within the cells and within the capacity to access what is above within the body. So our negative experiences are like a magnetic recording. One of the books I have back there is Irvin Laszlo's Science in the Akashic Field. And our cells have an Akashic field of memory. So these alter this residue if it's negative, if it's not clear, if things are unresolved in our lives. It becomes like a coding of our perception and our new experiences. That's what I call cellular residue. And that's our internal garbage dump. So when two people get together and they haven't done their internal clearing work, then it's like shouting at each other through tin cans. Very difficult to communicate and see each other in a new way and just taking present time information, because we're loaded up with this background information and have these perceptual filters. Okay, this is going into how when I work with people and we work with clearing and resolving issues, many people at the point of where something gets resolved actually see golden light inside their body. This is actually a remarkably common experience. After clearing, the pure ultramarine cellular consciousness can appear. This is less common, but it does happen, and I've worked with populations in India, I've worked with Japanese, I've worked with Europeans. So what I'm talking about here is a universal, the kinds of perceptions that people have. So this cellular consciousness, as it gets cleared and people see these different layers, that is universal, those kinds of images. This clearing of our cellular imprints and bringing things into present time, and in my work, if we're doing inner child work or somebody comes to a past life or whatever, we always integrate everything back to the heart center. So there's always that part of the body or that subpersonality that's been connected is always connected back into the heart center. So this clearing and integration work allows the chakra, the energy body, and this most physical body consciousness level to come into alignment. Integration brings the fragrant inner beauty of wholeness, gratitude, and peace. The divine within reflects the divine above. Until the day when the cells shall experience their own immortal light and the body become fully divine. What happens when the body consciousness becomes clear is that we can, and I have at times seen, the body is simply a matrix of light. When the cells recognize this matrix, instantaneous healings can occur, and have, with myself and others. It's the cells that recognize their own matrix of divinity. Namaste.
RVML Resource Center is a volunteer-operated federal 501c3 tax-exempt nonprofit organization. RVML is dedicated to providing easy access to a comprehensive collection of information on a variety of metaphysical, spiritual, and personal development subjects. RVML accepts and appreciates all donations. Material and monetary contributions are fully tax deductible. This recording is not copyrighted and permission is granted to broadcast, exhibit, or duplicate all or part of this program for non-commercial educational purposes. This live presentation was organized and presented by the Rogue Valley Metaphysical Library and Event Center. For more information, please visit rvml.org.